David Ross wiped grease from his hands and stared at the broken coolant valve. Another repair, another day, another reminder that he was just a small piece of machinery himself in this vast station. Harmony 7 stretched out in all directions around him. A city in space where hundreds of alien species lived and worked together. He'd been here for 8 months now, fixing things that broke, keeping systems running, barely talking to anyone. The voices echoed down the corridor before he saw them. A group of Torgan merchants stomped past, their reptilian faces animated with excitement. They were speaking in rapid clicks, but David's translator caught the words clearly enough. So adorable, one was saying. Nothing like it in the entire galaxy. David had heard the rumors. Everyone on the station was talking about the creature that Merchant Gora had brought back from an uncharted world 3 weeks ago. Apparently, every species that saw it fell in love instantly. The scientific term was universal appeal, but most people just called it cute beyond reason. He gathered his tools and headed toward the central hub. His next job was in Section 7, near the observation deck where they were keeping the creature. David didn't go out of his way to see popular attractions. Crowds made him uncomfortable, and lately, the observation deck had been packed every single day. When he arrived at the maintenance access point, he could hear the commotion through the walls. Dozens of voices in different languages, all making sounds of delight. David keyed in his code and slipped through the service entrance, hoping to avoid the crowd entirely. The environmental control panel was located behind a transparent barrier that looked into the observation room. David tried not to look, focusing on his diagnostic scanner, but curiosity got the better of him. He glanced up. The creature sat in the center of a cushioned platform surrounded by aliens of every description. It was small, about the size of a house cat with 6 legs and fur that seemed to shift colors like oil on water. Its eyes were large and dark, and its face had an expression that somehow read as peaceful across species boundaries. Right now its fur was showing soft blues and purples. A feln approached with its tentacles extended gently. The creature, which everyone called Pip, touched its nose to the tentacle tips and made a sound like wind chimes. The feln's skin flushed with happy colors. A moment later, Pip moved to greet a hulking Torgun warrior who knelt down with surprising gentleness. The warrior's fierce face softened completely. David understood why everyone was obsessed. There was something about the creature that pulled at something deep inside. Even from here, watching through the barrier, he felt it. A sense of calm, of rightness, like seeing a sunset after a long day. He forced himself back to work. The environmental controls were running hot, throwing off the temperature regulation for this entire section. He pulled the panel open and started checking circuits. Behind him, the sounds of adoration continued. Scientists were taking readings. Station personnel were recording behavior. Captain Rilth herself had apparently visited twice today. David was elbow-deep in wiring when the alarms went off. Not the emergency klaxons, just the containment alerts. He spun around and saw the barrier section sliding open. Someone must have triggered it accidentally. Pip sat at the opening, looking out at the maintenance corridor where David stood alone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Pip stepped through the gap. The crowd behind it surged forward in concern, but Pip ignored them completely. It walked directly toward David on its 6 legs, moving with strange grace. Its fur shifted through colors, settling on warm golds and greens. David froze. He didn't know the protocols for this. Should he back away? Try to guide it back? Call for help? Before he could decide, Pip reached him and sat down directly on his boot. It looked up at him, and David felt something click in his chest. Not metaphorically. He actually felt it, like a lock finding its key. Pip's fur blazed with bright, happy yellows. It made that wind chime sound again, but more complex, more like a song. David slowly knelt down, and Pip immediately climbed into his lap, circling once before settling down with a contented sigh. "Hey there," David whispered. His hands hovered uncertainly, then gently touched the creature's back. The fur was incredibly soft and warm. Pip leaned into the touch, and its colors pulsed gently. "Step away from the specimen," Captain Rilth's voice rang out. David looked up to see the avian commander striding toward him, feathers ruffled in agitation. Behind her, a crowd of scientists and onlookers pressed forward. David started to stand, but Pip made a sound he'd never heard before. A sharp, distressed trill. The creature's colors flashed red and black. It pressed itself against David's chest, trembling. "It's okay." David found himself saying. "It's okay, I'm here." Pip's colors immediately softened. The trembling stopped. Captain Rilth halted, her head tilting in confusion. Dr. Osei, the human biologist, pushed forward with her scanner active. "Fascinating," she breathed. "Its neural activity just spiked. And look at the bonding hormone levels. This isn't casual interest. This is—" She looked at David with wide eyes. "It's chosen you." David stared down at the creature in his arms. Pip gazed back with those deep, trusting eyes, and David felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Not since the transport accident that took his wife and daughter. He felt needed. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "Everyone loves it, why me?" Captain Rilth's expression shifted from irritation to something more thoughtful. "That," she said slowly, "is exactly what we need to find out." 3 days had passed since Pip refused to leave David's side, and the station had turned into a circus of scientific curiosity and political tension. David sat in his small quarters with Pip curled on his lap, watching the news feeds with growing unease. Every channel showed the same images: him holding Pip, looking confused and overwhelmed while aliens debated his worthiness. Dr. Osei had set up temporary monitoring equipment in his room. Sensors tracked Pip's vital signs, neural activity, and something she called bonding resonance. According to her preliminary reports, Pip's entire biochemistry had shifted when it chose David. The creature was now biologically linked to him in ways that made separation physically harmful to Pip, which means, Dr. Osei had explained yesterday, you're stuck with each other, at least until we understand what's happening. David didn't mind truthfully. Pip was easy company. The creature seemed to understand his moods, giving him space when he wanted to be alone with his thoughts and pressing close when the nightmares started creeping in. Right now, Pip's fur showed content purples and soft grays matching the quiet evening atmosphere. A chime at his door interrupted the peace. David sighed and stood, careful not to disturb Pip, who simply floated up and landed on his shoulder. He'd learned that Pip could manipulate local gravity fields around itself. Just another impossible thing about an already impossible creature. Captain Rilth stood in the doorway with 2 Feln delegates behind her. The aquatic aliens wore moisture suits that gave their voices a bubbling quality through the translators. "We must speak with you about the Sacred One," the lead Feln said, gesturing at Pip. "Our ancient texts describe a creature of many colors that brought wisdom to our people thousands of years ago. This being matches every description." David blinked. "I'm sorry, but that seems unlikely. Dr. Osei said Pip is probably only a few years old based on cellular analysis." The second Feln rippled with disagreement. "Time means nothing to beings of higher purpose. We formally request custody for religious study." "Absolutely not," Captain Rilth cut in. "The creature has made its choice clear. Besides, we have 3 other species making similar claims." She looked at David with sympathy. "There's going to be a formal hearing tomorrow. The council needs to determine legal custody." After they left, David sat heavily on his bunk. Pip climbed down from his shoulder and pushed its head against his hand. David stroked the soft fur absently. "Why me?" he asked aloud. "I'm nobody special. Just a guy who fixes air filters and power couplings." Pip's colors shifted to warm golds, and David felt a wave of emotion that wasn't his own. Acceptance. Understanding. Something that felt like the creature was saying he was exactly what it needed. The hearing room was packed. David had never seen so many species in one place, all of them focused on him and the small creature perched on his shoulder. Pip seemed unbothered by the attention, occasionally grooming itself or making small chirping sounds. The Feln made their case first, showing ancient drawings that did resemble Pip. Then the Torgan representatives argued that Pip was clearly a juvenile of their species' ancient guardians. A wealthy collector named Surin offered testimony about how Pip belonged in a preserve where it could be properly protected and studied. David barely followed the arguments. Legal language and multiple species frameworks made his head spin, but he understood the core issue. Everyone wanted Pip, and nobody thought a random human maintenance worker deserved to keep it. Finally, Captain Rilth called David to speak. He walked to the center platform on shaking legs, very aware of hundreds of eyes watching him. Pip stayed on his shoulder, its weight reassuring. "I don't have fancy arguments," David started. "I'm not a scientist or a religious leader or a collector. I'm just someone who lost everything and came out here to be alone." His voice cracked slightly. "But Pip chose me, not the other way around." And every test Dr. O.C. runs shows that Pip is healthier and happier with me than in any controlled environment. He paused, gathering courage. Maybe that's the point. Maybe Pip doesn't need someone who sees it as sacred or rare or valuable. Maybe it just needs someone who sees it as Pip. Someone who needs a friend as much as it does. The room fell silent. Then Pip did something it had never done before. The creature lifted itself from David's shoulder and floated to the center of the room, its body glowing with bioluminescent patterns. Colors swirled across its fur in complex sequences that felt like language. Everyone watched, transfixed. David felt emotions washing from Pip in waves. Loss, loneliness, searching, and then, when the patterns shifted to warm golds and greens, he felt joy, recognition, home. The display lasted only a minute, but when Pip returned to David's shoulder, the whole room had changed. Some delegates looked thoughtful. Others seemed moved. Surin, the collector, had tears running down his scaled face. Dr. Osei stood up. I've been analyzing the display. Pip was communicating. Its bioluminescence carries encoded emotional data that translates across species. What it just said was... She looked at her scanner in wonder. It said it's been searching for someone who understands what it means to be alone. Someone who knows loss. Someone who can love without owning. Humans aren't the only species that experience loss, a Torgan delegate objected. No, Dr. Osei agreed. But humans have a unique psychological profile. We form attachments quickly and deeply, even across vast differences. We anthropomorphize, we empathize, we bond with almost anything, and we carry our grief in ways that make us capable of profound connection. She looked at David. Pip didn't choose David because humans are special. It chose him because he's exactly the kind of person its creators designed it to find. The council deliberated for hours. David waited in an antechamber, Pip dozing in his lap. He thought about his wife Sarah and his daughter Lily, how much he'd loved them, how their loss had nearly destroyed him. He'd come to space to escape the memories, to find somewhere his grief couldn't follow. But maybe grief wasn't something to escape. Maybe it was proof that he'd loved deeply enough for it to matter. Captain Rilth finally emerged. The council has reached a decision. You and Pip may remain together, but there's a condition. She handed him a data tablet. There are 3 ancient sites associated with Pip's creators. The council wants you to visit them, prove that your bond is real, that humans can be trusted with such a unique being. Complete this journey, and no one can challenge your custody again. David looked down at Pip, who gazed back with trusting eyes. A journey across space to ancient ruins sounded dangerous and exhausting, but looking at the small creature who'd chosen him out of an entire galaxy of options, David found himself nodding. When do we leave? The small ship rattled as it dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and David's stomach did an uncomfortable flip. He'd never been good with space travel, which was ironic considering he'd chosen to live on a station. Pip pressed against his chest, its fur showing calming blues, and the nausea faded slightly. First sight coming into visual range, announced their pilot. A gruff trader named Wells who'd agreed to ferry them for a reasonable fee. Through the viewport, David saw a dead world. Gray rocks, no atmosphere, no signs of life. Just ruins jutting from the surface like broken teeth. Captain Rilth sat across from him in the cramped passenger bay. She'd insisted on coming along to represent the station's interests. Dr. Osei sat beside her, excitement practically radiating from her as she checked her scientific equipment for the 100th time. The 4th member of their group was a Feln mystic named Sorrel, who'd been granted permission to observe for religious purposes. Doesn't look like much, David murmured. Pip chirped softly in response. The creators were an advanced civilization, Dr. Osei explained, not looking up from her scanner. They went extinct roughly 50,000 years ago. We know almost nothing about them except what Pip's genetic code tells us. They were biosynthetic engineers without equal. The landing was rough. Wells didn't believe in gentle touchdowns. They suited up, David pulling on a standard environment suit while Pip floated beside him, apparently unbothered by the lack of atmosphere. Dr. Osei's scans confirmed that Pip could generate its own protective field. The ruins spread across a vast plain. Structures that might have been buildings once now eroded to their basic frameworks. But at the center stood something intact, a pyramid of dark material that seemed to absorb light. As they approached, symbols began glowing on its surface. It's responding to Pip, Dr. Osei breathed. The biosignature is activating ancient systems. The pyramid's entrance opened silently. Inside, soft light emanated from the walls themselves. The corridor split immediately into two paths. Above the junction, symbols pulsed with meaning that David's translator couldn't interpret. But somehow he understood. Bonded pairs must separate here. Separate? David felt Pip tense against him. What does that mean? Soral's voice bubbled through the comm system. A test of trust. One path for the human, one for the companion. You must navigate without direct contact, relying only on your bond. David looked at Pip, who stared back with worried eyes, its fur flickering between colors uncertainly. He'd never been separated from Pip since the bonding. Even the thought made his chest tight. We don't have to do this, Captain Rilth said firmly. If it's too dangerous, no. David surprised himself with the certainty in his voice. We came here to prove the bond is real. That means trusting it. He looked at Pip. I trust you. Pip's colors steadied to determined golds. It floated up and touched its nose to David's helmet, then drifted toward the left passage. David's heart clenched, but he walked to the right. The passage was dark except for occasional symbols that glowed as he approached. Each symbol seemed to indicate a direction. Forward, left, right. But David didn't follow them. Instead, he closed his eyes and tried to feel Pip. At first, nothing. Then, like a radio signal finding its frequency, he sensed emotion, not his own. Pip was scared but moving forward. David opened his eyes and walked, not following the symbols but following the sense of Pip. The feeling grew stronger, pulling him down passages that seemed wrong according to the markings. Several times he reached intersections where the symbols pointed one way, but the sense of Pip pulled him another. He followed the bond. The passages grew more complex. David found himself climbing, squeezing through narrow gaps, doubling back when he hit dead ends. But always he felt Pip somewhere in the maze, a warm presence in the back of his mind, and he pushed his own feelings outward, hoping Pip could sense him too. I'm here, I'm coming, I trust you. Time lost meaning in the dark passages. David's legs ached. His suit's oxygen gauge showed yellow warnings, but he kept following the bond. Then suddenly the passage opened into a vast chamber, and there was Pip, floating in the center waiting for him. David ran forward, and Pip shot toward him like a missile, crashing into his chest. Its fur blazed with joyous yellows and golds. David laughed in relief, holding the creature close even through his helmet. We did it, he whispered. The chamber responded to their reunion. Walls lit up with images, moving pictures that showed the story of Pip's creators. They had been a powerful civilization, mastering technology beyond current galactic understanding. But in their images, David saw something familiar: loneliness. The creators stood apart from each other, isolated by their own advancement. They'd lost the ability to connect. In their final days, knowing they would die out, they'd created Pip's species. Not as servants or tools, but as a gift to the future. Creatures designed to find beings capable of true connection and teach them what the creators had lost: the value of bonds that transcended logic. Dr. Osei's voice crackled over the comm. David, we're picking up massive energy readings from your location. What's happening? I think we passed the first test, David replied, watching the images. The creators had built these trials not as obstacles, but as lessons. Trust wasn't just believing in someone. It was following your heart even when logic said otherwise. A door opened at the far end of the chamber, leading deeper into the pyramid. David felt Pip's curiosity, its eagerness to continue. But he also felt exhaustion in the bond. His own mostly, but some from Pip too. We should rest before going further. Captain Rilth's practical voice cut in. She'd been monitoring from outside. That trial took 4 hours. You need food and proper oxygen, David agreed reluctantly. As they made their way back to the surface, Pip riding on his shoulder, he felt something had changed between them. The bond was stronger, more defined. He could sense Pip's moods more clearly now, and he suspected Pip could do the same with him. Back at the ship, David removed his helmet and collapsed onto a bench. Pip immediately curled into his lap, and they sat in comfortable silence while Dr. Osei excitedly reviewed her data and Captain Rilth coordinated with the station. Soral approached David with an expression of reverence. The sacred texts were right but incomplete. They described Pip's species as teachers. Now I understand. They teach by bonding, by showing us what we're capable of when we truly trust another being. David scratched behind Pip's ears, earning a contented purr. 2 more sites to go, he said quietly. 2 more tests. Pip's colors pulsed with confidence. David felt the emotion behind it, together. Whatever came next, they would face it together. As Wells prepped the ship for departure to the second site, David stared out at the dead world. A civilization had died here, but they'd left behind something that might help others live better. There was something both sad and hopeful about that. His communicator beeped. A message from an unknown sender. David opened it and his blood ran cold. It was from Saran, the collector. The message was simple. 2 sites remain. I know where they are. We should talk about Pip's future before you reach them. A threat thinly veiled as an offer. David deleted Saran's message for the 3rd time that day, but it didn't stop new ones from arriving. The collector was persistent, his offers growing more elaborate. Money, rare artifacts, a private moon, anything David wanted in exchange for Pip. When David didn't respond, the messages turned darker. Warnings about the dangers ahead, suggestions that David was being selfish keeping Pip from proper care, thinly veiled implications about accidents in deep space. You should report this to station security, Dr. O.C. said, reading over David's shoulder as another message appeared. They were 2 days into the journey to the second site and the cramped ship felt smaller every hour. What would they do? David replied tiredly. Surin hasn't technically threatened violence. He's just being persistent. Pip chirped from its spot on the table where it was examining a puzzle sphere Dr. O.C. had given it. The creature solved it in 30 seconds, manipulating the complex segments with precise movements. Pip had gotten noticeably smarter over the past week, or perhaps more comfortable showing its intelligence. Captain Rilth entered the common area, her feathers slightly ruffled. We have a problem. Long-range scanners picked up another ship following us. It's staying just out of clear identification range, but it's definitely tracking our course. David's stomach sank. Surin, most likely. Or someone else who wants Pip. Rilth's expression was grim. Wells says we're 6 hours from the second site. If they're planning something, it'll probably happen there. The second site was different from the first. It orbited a gas giant, a small installation built into an asteroid. As their ship approached, David could see another vessel already docked. Sleek, expensive, with weapon ports that weren't quite military grade but far beyond civilian standard. Surin had beaten them here. We can leave, Wells said flatly. I didn't sign up for a firefight. No. David surprised himself again. Pip was pressed against his chest and he could feel the creature's determination mixing with his own. We came to complete the trials. Running now means giving up. They docked on the opposite side of the asteroid. As they suited up, Captain Rilth distributed small defensive devices. Shields only, she said firmly. We're here peacefully, but if Surin tries anything, these will protect you long enough to retreat. The installation's entrance accepted Pip's biosignature, just like the first site. Inside, corridors led to a central chamber that made David's breath catch. It was enormous, filled with floating platforms connected by bridges of hardened light. At the center, suspended in midair, was a data core that pulsed with soft light. Surin stood on one of the platforms, flanked by 2 large security personnel. The collector was tall, vaguely reptilian, with scales that shimmered like oil. His eyes fixed on Pip with an intensity that made David uncomfortable. David Ross, Surin said smoothly. I was hoping you'd arrive safely. These ancient sites can be dangerous. What do you want? David kept his voice steady, though his heart raced. To help you understand what you have. Surin gestured at Pip. That creature is priceless beyond measure. Its genetic code alone could revolutionize biotechnology across the galaxy. And you're just a maintenance worker, completely unprepared for what that means. Pip isn't property, David replied. And I'm not selling. Everything is property, Surin said sadly. I've studied these ruins for years, David. I know what this trial requires. Sacrifice. The core will demand you choose between Pip's safety and gaining the knowledge stored here. When you choose Pip, as you must, I'll be here to take custody, for its own good. Before David could respond, the chamber reacted to Pip's presence. The data core blazed brighter, and symbols appeared on every surface. David's translator caught fragments: choice, value, purpose. The floating platforms began to move, rearranging themselves into a pattern, A pathway formed leading to the data core, but it was unstable, sections flickering in and out of existence. At the same time, another path formed leading to an exit portal that glowed with safety. The message was clear. Reach the core and gain knowledge, but risk Pip's safety in the process, or take the safe path and leave with nothing. You see, Surin said. The trial is designed to be impossible, but I can offer you an alternative. Give me custody and I'll retrieve the knowledge. We both win. David looked at the flickering path to the core. Some platforms looked solid. Others phased randomly. Pip could float, but David would need to jump, and one wrong move meant falling into the void below. Pip pressed against him, and David felt the creature's fear. Then he felt something else. Trust. Pip wasn't afraid of falling. It was afraid for David. No deal, David said to Surin. Then he looked at Pip. Can you do something for me? Go to that exit portal and wait for me there. Pip's colors flashed with alarm. Red and black, the distress pattern. It chirped frantically, pressing harder against David. I know, David said softly, but this is my choice. The trial is about sacrifice, right? About what we value most. He gently pushed Pip away. I value you more than knowledge. More than anything in this place. So go be safe, please. For a long moment, Pip didn't move. Then its colors shifted through a dozen emotions. Fear, confusion, love, trust. Finally, it floated toward the exit portal, moving slowly, constantly looking back at David. David turned to face the path to the data core. He took a breath and stepped onto the first platform. It held solid. He jumped to the next and it flickered but stabilized. Behind him, he heard Saran curse. What are you doing? The trial demands you choose safety. No, David called back, jumping to another platform. It demands I show what I value, and I value Pip's safety more than my own. He landed on a platform that phased out for a moment, his stomach dropping before it solidified again. But that doesn't mean I give up. It means I take the risk so Pip doesn't have to. The platforms responded to his words. They became more stable, the path clearer. David ran now, jumping from platform to platform, his heart soaring. He understood. Sacrifice wasn't about giving up. It was about taking the harder path so the ones you loved didn't have to. He reached the data core and touched it. Information flooded his mind, overwhelming and beautiful. The creator's entire history, their hopes, their final message. They'd made Pip to find beings capable of selfless love, because that was the one thing they'd lost. The one thing that could save any species from their fate. The chamber filled with light. When it faded, David stood on solid ground, the platforms gone. The exit portal expanded and Pip shot through it, crashing into David with enough force to knock him over. The creature's colors were pure gold, brighter than David had ever seen. Surin stared in disbelief. That's not... The trial should have what? Captain Rilth had her weapon drawn, pointed at Surin's guards. You thought David would fail because he'd choose safety? You don't understand humans at all. Dr. Osei was scanning everything frantically. The data core is downloading information directly to my equipment. This is incredible. The creator's entire knowledge base, their understanding of bonding, the genetic templates for Pip's species. She looked at David with awe. Do you know what this means? David did know. He'd seen it in the core's memories. Pip wasn't unique. Pip could create others like itself, companions for any being who truly understood what bonding meant. The creator's gift wasn't just one creature. It was the possibility of ending loneliness across the galaxy. Surin seemed to shrink. I could have had it all. The knowledge, the creature, everything? No, David said quietly, holding Pip close. You could never have had Pip because you see it as a thing to own. But Pip isn't property. It's a friend, a family member, and that's something you can't buy. Security forces from the station arrived soon after, responding to Captain Rilth's alert. They took Surin into custody for harassment and stalking. As they led him away, the collector looked at David one last time. You're just a maintenance worker, Surin said bitterly. Why you? David thought about Sarah and Lily, about loss and grief and learning to open his heart again. He thought about Pip choosing him out of all the galaxy's beings. He looked at the creature in his arms, at its trusting eyes and warm colors. Because I know what it means to love something more than yourself, David answered simply. News of their success at the second site spread faster than their ship could travel. By the time they reached the third and final location, David's communicator was flooded with messages, interview requests, offers of book deals, species delegations wanting to discuss companion bonding programs. Dr. Osei fielded most of them, while David tried to process everything the data core had shown him. The knowledge sat in his mind, like a vast library he was only beginning to explore. He understood now why the creators had gone extinct. They'd achieved perfection in technology and knowledge, but lost the imperfections that made life worth living: mistakes, emotions, irrational attachments, all the messy things that humans excelled at. Pip had grown during their journey, not physically but in presence. The creature was more confident, its colors more vibrant and complex. Sometimes David caught it making patterns that looked like writing, as if Pip was remembering its own origins more clearly with each trial completed. The final sight made the others look simple. It was built into the heart of a dying star, protected by technology that made whales whistle in appreciation. A station that had survived millions of years in conditions that should have vaporized it instantly. The creators really wanted to make sure this place lasted, Dr. Osei said, studying her readings. The power generation here is beyond anything in current galactic use. If we could understand even a fraction of it, that's not why we're here, Captain Rilth reminded her gently. Final trial, final proof. Then we can let the scientists study it properly. As they docked, David felt nervous for the first time since the journey began. The first trial tested trust. The second tested sacrifice. What would the third test? He held Pip close, feeling the creature's steady presence in his mind. Whatever came, they'd face it together. The station's interior was pristine, as if the creators had left yesterday. Rooms filled with equipment, living spaces designed for beings long dead, corridors that hummed with power. At the center was a massive chamber with walls that showed the cosmos itself, stars and galaxies spinning in real-time displays. In the middle of it all stood a platform, and on that platform was a figure. Not alive, David realized. A hologram, but incredibly detailed. It showed one of the creators, tall, slender, with features that reminded David of every species and none at all. Welcome, the hologram said in a voice that bypassed translators, speaking directly to understanding. You have passed the trials of trust and sacrifice. Now comes the final test. Understanding. The walls changed, showing images of the creator's civilization, their rise, their achievements, their slow isolation. The hologram gestured to the scenes. We built wonders, it said. We conquered physics, reshaped matter, extended our lives beyond measure. But in doing so, we forgot why any of it mattered. We stopped connecting. We stopped loving. We stopped needing each other. The hologram's expression was profoundly sad. When we realized our mistake, it was too late. We were too few, too distant, too lost in our own perfection. The images shifted to show the creation of Pip's species, genetic engineering beyond anything David had seen even in the data core's memories. The creators had poured everything they'd lost into these creatures, the capacity for unconditional love, the ability to bond across any barrier, the instinct to heal loneliness. We made them as our final gift, the hologram continued. Not to bring us back, but to ensure no other species made our mistakes. They seek out beings capable of connection, of love, of caring more for others than themselves. They bond, and through that bond they teach. The hologram turned to David directly. You have shown trust. You have shown sacrifice. Now show us understanding. Answer the question we could not answer in time. What is the purpose of love? David felt the weight of the question. Around him his companions waited. Dr. Osei with her scientific curiosity, Captain Rilth with her military discipline, Sorrel with religious fervor. All of them had different perspectives, different answers they might give. But the question wasn't for them. It was for David and for Pip. He looked at the creature on his shoulder. Pip's colors swirled thoughtfully, and David felt the bond between them humming with something deep and powerful. All the knowledge in the galaxy, all the technology and advancement meant nothing without this connection. This sense of belonging to someone and having them belong to you. Love isn't about purpose, David said slowly, working through his thoughts. That's the wrong question. You're asking why love matters, as if it needs to justify itself. But love is the justification. It's the reason to build wonders, the reason to wake up each day, the reason anything matters at all. He thought about Sarah and Lily, how their deaths had nearly destroyed him. Love hurts. It makes you vulnerable. It's inefficient and irrational and completely impractical, but it's what makes us alive instead of just functional. He touched Pip gently. You created Pip to teach connection, but connection isn't a means to an end. It's the end itself. The point. The purpose you were looking for. The hologram was silent for a long moment. Then it smiled, and something in that expression was heartbreakingly human. Understanding achieved, it said softly. We spent millennia trying to perfect ourselves to rise above our weaknesses. We never realized that our weaknesses were our strengths, the need for others, the fear of loss, the irrational attachment to beings who couldn't benefit us. These weren't flaws. They were the point. The chamber shifted. The walls became transparent, showing the dying star outside in all its terrible beauty. The hologram gestured to it. This star will consume this station in a few thousand years. We built this place to last until the right beings found it. Beings who could understand what we learned too late. You've passed all 3 trials not because you're perfect, but because you're beautifully imperfect. Because you fail in fear and love anyway. Light began to emanate from the platform, soft and warm. Pip floated up from David's shoulder, and David felt a moment of panic. But the bond reassured him. Pip was changing, not leaving. The creature's body shifted, grew, became more defined. 6 legs became more obviously functional. The face more expressive. The fur more responsive to thought. Pip had been in a juvenile stage, David realized. This was maturity, triggered by completing the understanding trial. But more than that, David felt new capabilities flowing through the bond. Pip could do more than just bond with him now. The knowledge from the data core combined with the understanding from this chamber activated something in Pip's genetics. The ability to create, not offspring in the traditional sense, but new companions, perfectly designed for beings who truly understood connection. Pip settled back onto David's shoulder, heavier now, more present. Its colors showed pride and love and readiness. The trials are complete, the hologram said. Pip is fully awakened. The knowledge is yours. The future is open. It began to fade. Thank you for showing us, even in death, that our final creation succeeded. That somewhere in the galaxy, beings still understand what we forgot. The hologram disappeared. The chamber's lights dimmed. And then from the walls, information began downloading to Dr. Osei's equipment. Technology, genetic templates, historical records. Everything the creators wanted to share with beings who'd proven worthy. Dr. Osei made a sound between a laugh and a sob. This is everything. Their entire civilization's knowledge, freely given. Do you understand what this means for the galaxy? David understood. But more importantly, he felt Pip's contentment through the bond and his own answering piece. They'd completed something important, not for the technology or knowledge, but because it proved what his heart had known from the moment Pip chose him. Some bonds transcended species, logic, and even death itself. 6 months after completing the trials, David stood in a garden section of Harmony 7 that hadn't existed before. Plants from a dozen worlds grew in carefully managed environments, creating a space of peace in the busy station. He'd helped design it using some of the creator's environmental technology to make something beautiful for everyone. Pip floated beside him, now twice the size it had been when they first met. The creature's maturity had brought new abilities, new intelligence, but also a deeper capacity for affection. Right now, its fur showed content greens and blues as it watched station residents walk through the garden, their faces relaxing in the calm space. David Ross? A nervous voice made him turn. A young Torgan stood there, barely an adult by their species standards. I was told you could help me. I've been very alone since coming to the station. David smiled gently. What's your name? Karsh. I'm a student here for an engineering exchange. But I don't connect well with others. My clutchmates always said I was too emotional, too soft. The admission clearly cost Karsh something. Emotional isn't weakness, David said, thinking of everything he'd learned. Sometimes it's the bravest thing you can be. Come here. Pip floated down to examine Karsh, colors shifting thoughtfully. David felt the bond humming as Pip assessed the young Torgan. Loneliness, yes. Self-doubt, certainly. But also capacity for deep care, for loyalty, for exactly the kind of connection Pip was made to nurture. Pip's body began to glow. David had seen this 3 times before, and it never stopped being miraculous. Light gathered around Pip, spinning into patterns that looked like DNA made visible. The light separated, forming a new shape beside Pip. Smaller, still forming, but undeniably another companion creature. The new creature solidified, its colors uncertain, its form matching Pip's juvenile stage. It looked around with wide eyes, then focused on Karsh. The young Torgun gasped as the creature floated toward him. "Is it for me?" Karsh whispered. "If you choose each other," David said. "Extend your hand," Karsh did, trembling slightly. The new creature landed on his palm, and David saw the moment the bond formed. Karsh's eyes widened, tears forming, and the creature's colors burst into joyful yellows. "I can feel it," Karsh breathed. "It's not just in my head, it's in my heart. He looked at David with wonder. "It thinks I'm enough, just as I am." "That's what they do," David said softly. "They find people who need to know they're not alone, and they show them the truth. You are enough, Karsh. You always were." After Karsh left, clutching his new companion with joy and terror mixed together, Captain Rilth approached through the garden. She'd become a friend during the journey, someone David could talk to about the weight of what they discovered. "That's the fourth one this month," she observed. "At this rate, Pip will have created companions for half the station within a year." "That was always the design," David replied. "The creators made Pip to spread connection, not hoard it. Every person who truly understands what bonding means can receive a companion, and each of those companions can eventually create others. Exponential growth of love and connection," Rilth said with a smile. "Most species would find that terrifying. Humans seem to find it natural." David considered that. In the months since returning, he'd learned something about humanity that the data core had only hinted at. Humans bonded easily, formed attachments quickly, and cared deeply for beings completely unlike themselves. Other species found it strange, even risky. But for humans, it was just normal. "We're good at love," David said simply. "Not because we're better than other species, but because we never learned to be afraid of it. We know it hurts sometimes. We know we'll lose the things we love eventually, but we love anyway." Dr. Osi's voice came over David's communicator. "David, could you come to the research lab? We have visitors from Earth. They want to discuss establishing a companion bonding program for human colonies." David sighed but smiled. The attention had been overwhelming at first, but he'd learned to handle it. More importantly, he'd learned to delegate. There were now dozens of researchers studying the creator's knowledge, hundreds of administrators working on ethical bonding protocols, and thousands of beings across the galaxy waiting for their chance at a companion. The research lab had expanded to fill 3 entire sections of the station. Dr. Osi practically lived there now. Though David had noticed she smiled more these days, the work gave her purpose, and she'd bonded with a companion of her own 2 months ago, a creature she'd named Spark who helped her think through complex problems. The Earth delegation was impressive. Government officials, xenopsychologists, ethicists, and religious leaders. They all stood when David entered, treating him with a respect that still made him uncomfortable. He was just a maintenance worker who'd gotten lucky, or perhaps unlucky, depending on how he looked at it. Mr. Ross, the lead delegate, said warmly, "Thank you for meeting with us. We've been studying the data from the trials, and we have questions about implementing companion bonding on Earth itself." David spent 2 hours answering questions, explaining protocols, discussing ethical considerations. Pip dozed on his shoulder for most of it, occasionally adding supportive chirps. By the end, the delegates were satisfied and excited. As they left, one of them paused. An older woman with kind eyes. "Mr. Ross, can I ask something personal?" "Sure." "The reports say Pip chose you because of your loss. Your wife and daughter. Do you still grieve for them?" David felt the familiar ache, but it was gentler now. Pip stirred on his shoulder, offering comfort through the bond. "Every day," David admitted. "But grief and love aren't opposites. Grief is just love with nowhere to go. Pip didn't take away my grief. It gave me somewhere to put my love again." The woman nodded, understanding in her expression. "That's what we hope to bring to Earth. Not a cure for loneliness, but a reminder that we're all capable of connection." "Thank you." That evening, David returned to his quarters, which had grown significantly since his early days on the station. He'd been offered larger spaces, even a private residence, but he'd kept it relatively simple. A comfortable bed, a workspace, shelves filled with gifts from grateful beings who'd received companions. Pip settled onto the bed while David prepared a simple meal. The creature had learned to eat solid food recently, though it still preferred the energy supplements Dr. Ose provided. David watched Pip groom itself, colors shifting through peaceful purples, and felt overwhelming gratitude. His communicator chimed. A message from Earth, from Sarah's sister Patricia. They'd reconnected recently, tentatively at first, then with growing warmth. Patricia had been afraid David blamed her for not being on the transport that day. David had been afraid Patricia blamed him for surviving. The message was simple. The grief counselor I've been seeing suggested I apply for a companion. I'm scared, David. What if I'm not ready? David typed back quickly. You're ready when you decide you are. But Pip's kin don't judge readiness. They judge capacity for love. And I know you have that in abundance. Minutes later, Patricia responded, I'm filling out the application. Wish me luck. David smiled and wished her luck, then settled onto the bed beside Pip. The creature immediately curled against him, warm and solid and real. David thought about the creators, about their final gift to the galaxy. They'd been trying to save others from their fate, but in doing so they'd achieved a kind of immortality. Every bond formed, every companion created, every person who learned they weren't alone. That was the creators living on. Pip? David said quietly. The creature's colors shifted to attentive golds. Thank you for choosing me, Pip chirped, and through the bond, David felt the response. Thank you for being someone worth choosing. Outside the window, Harmony 7 spun in space, home to thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds, and spreading among them slowly but inevitably was a revolution of connection. Companions finding their bonded partners, teaching them that love transcended every barrier. Some species tried to militarize it, to study and control it. But the companions only bonded with beings who understood what the creators had learned too late. Love wasn't a tool or a weapon or a resource. It was the point, the reason, the answer to questions they'd been asking wrong. David closed his eyes, feeling Pip's heartbeat against his chest, and thought about humanity's place in this vast galaxy. Humans weren't the strongest or smartest or most advanced, but they were very, very good at one thing. They were good at love. And in a universe that had nearly forgotten what love meant, that made them exactly what the galaxy needed. Not conquerors or warriors or geniuses, just beings who knew instinctively and profoundly that caring for someone else was the most powerful force in existence. David drifted to sleep with Pip warm against him, dreaming of Sarah and Lily, knowing they would have loved to see this. Knowing that somewhere in the pattern of love spreading across the stars their memory lived on, not in grief but in every connection formed, every bond chosen, every person who learned they mattered to someone. The galaxy was learning what humanity had always known. We're all better when we're not alone.